What's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and today, in the second episode of this Lightning Web Component Masterclass, we're going to go over what the DOM is, or the Document Object Model, which is what DOM stands for. And we'll also be going over the different types of DOMs, like the regular DOM, the light DOM, the shadow DOM, the synthetic shadow DOM, and DOM from Fast and the Furious. Maybe not the last one. Anyway, this is an important lesson, so stick with me and, let's get to it. All right, everybody, welcome to the second episode of the Lightning Web Component Masterclass. Today we are going to be talking about the DOM, or the Document Object Model, not Dom from the Fast and the Furious, like I mentioned in the intro, sadly, or in my opinion, not sadly, because those movies were pretty bad. I mean, it was okay till Tokyo Drift. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Getting off topic here. We're going to be talking about the DOM in relation to your web browser, the Document Object Model. And we'll also be talking about different types of DOMs that you will potentially work with in Salesforce, the shadow DOM, the synthetic shadow DOM, and the light DOM. So it'll be important to know. It might not sound like the most exciting topic in the whole world, but let me tell you, as someone who is getting into Lightning Web Component development, which means that you are getting into essentially front-end web development, knowing what the DOM is and how it works is important because it kind of provides you everything that you need to actually be able to manipulate stuff in a web page. So, super important, so stick with me. But before we get into the super exciting stuff related to the DOM and learn all about it, if you enjoy this video, please make sure to like it, because when you do, it helps this video get out to more people just like yourself who want to learn this stuff for free too. And if you really love the video, make sure to subscribe, and if you can, contribute to the channel by becoming a paid member of the channel, or scheduling consulting hours with me, or donating through Patreon. But, no matter what, just enjoy the video. And thanks for being here. Now that all of that marketing garbage is out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. What is the DOM? I like that. I didn't plan that. It worked out that way, though. What is the DOM? A lot of people will mistakenly refer to the DOM as just the HTML that makes up the page, which I can understand why people would make that mistake. And in some respects, it's semi-accurate, but it isn't right. I'll just put it that way. So a lot of people, if you right-click on the page, any web page, and you go to the inspect option that will show up, you can take a look at the HTML that makes up the page that someone has written and put together and provided for you, right? And a lot of people, again, will think that this is the DOM. But in reality, the HTML is not the DOM. What the HTML does is help provide the information to your browser to build the DOM, right? So again, DOM stands for Document Object Model. And when you create HTML, what happens is, or when you land on a web page and the web page provides HTML to your browser, what's happening is in the background, your browser, through its rendering engine, is going to grab that HTML, parse it, and turn it into a document object model in memory. And because the browser provides to you that document object model in memory, you, as a web developer, now have the option via JavaScript or other scripting languages to manipulate that document object model. So it's a really important distinction that the HTML, while it is a very, very critical portion, is actually not the DOM. it feeds into your browser for your browser to create the DOM. Confusing, right? But let's take a look at it from a Salesforce perspective that maybe will make it a little bit easier to visualize. So in Salesforce, when we want to represent a type of data, basically a container for data, we create what we refer to as objects, right? So if I'm over here in my object manager in Salesforce, we can see that we have an account object to represent accounts. We have the contact object to represent contacts and things along those lines, right? And then once we create these objects, we feed information into those objects via records, right? So if I went to the account object, I would, create a new account object, and I've really got to fix my CSS in this org. And then I would, fill this out and create an account record, right? And then we'd end up with something like this, where I have this ridiculous Jambo James account. We just keep doing that until we have all the accounts in our system that we want, right? And so you can kind of think of the DOM in a similar way. Basically, what's happening with the document object model in your browser is that the browser's rendering engine is creating objects that represent your HTML's layout, right? So if we bring back the HTML for this page, bring it back over here. The browser is taking this HTML and it's creating objects that represent that HTML, and then it's feeding those objects in as records to the document object model. That's the gist of it. It's not that different from the whole object concept in Salesforce. And in fact, if we went back to the object manager and we took a look at the schema builder, and then we just took a look at a couple of objects, like, let me clear all these. We just have account and contact, for instance. Inside, let's do auto layout. We have really, see, this is why nobody uses a schema builder. If we take a look at this, we even have parent-child relationships, right? So we know, if you've worked in Salesforce enough, that the account is the parent for a contact. And much like Salesforce lookup and master detail relationships, the document object model does the same thing. It takes your HTML and it creates parent-child relationships. So our parent for this entire HTML document is the HTML tag, and then there would be the head tag, and then underneath the head as a child would be the style elements here, and so on and so forth. So it creates this kind of object representation of your web page and creates those parent-child relationships between your between the elements or the tags that you place in the page, the head tag, the style tag, title tag, etc. So that the document object model, and now because the document object model exists, your code, your JavaScript, is able to understand where everything resides in the page, and you're able to traverse the page to gain access to each element. Much like you would do in a SQL query. Right? If you wanted to find data through Apex, you would use SQL to query for that data and return it to you. Well, we're going to use JavaScript query selectors, as we'll see in the future, to retrieve information from the DOM. right? Not very different at all. It's the exact same concept. What, just in a different way. It's just done in a different way. So in Salesforce, we create objects that represent, data storage mechanism, a table in a database that allows you to create records and fill it up. In a DOM, we also create objects that represent each of the tags or the elements in your page, more or less. There's more to that, but I'm trying to keep it simple and digestible for now. So that's really what's going on, is we're creating this object model, much like we do in Salesforce, to represent the HTML structure that we have built for your browser to be able to interpret. Maybe it makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, there's a couple of articles that I'm going to link in the documentation that will help go over this even more. But I hope this breaks it down a little bit. It's like a lot of times people will take the data loader, right? You created your objects in Salesforce. You've got a whole CSV spreadsheet of data that you want to feed into your Salesforce system, and then you use the data loader to feed all that CSV information into your objects in Salesforce. Same idea. You've got your HTML, and you want to feed that information into your browser, and then what your browser does when it takes that HTML information is it feeds it into its appropriate objects to make the DOM. Cool. Same concept, different systems. All right, now that we have an okay idea of what the DOM is, and by the way, there's a lot more to the DOM than what I'm going over here, but I just want to give you the basic concepts that are important to understand, right? If you want to know more about the DOM and the intricacies of it and the rendering engine of your browser, I'm going to put some information, some links in the description of the video that I think are really useful and simple enough for a beginner to understand in the description. So check those out if you want more information about it. I obviously can't go over everything, or this video would be super long, and my videos are already pretty long compared to most people. So anyway, now that we've gone over that stuff, we should take a look together at how the DOM tree is built. So what you're looking at here in this Elements tab is what a lot of people, most people will refer to as the DOM tree, right? So again, this is your HTML, but what is kind of a little bit different than when you're actually writing the HTML is that this this view in the Elements tab in the inspector of your browser is giving you the tree of your DOM, or the order in which your elements are nested, right, when the DOM gets built. So again, like, our HTML is our top area here, and then we have our head, and then below the head tag is the style, etc., etc. Now, this is a lot going on, and this is a complex web page. So what I want to do is just create a Lightning Web Component together to see the DOM as it gets created based on the Lightning Web Component that you are creating. So what we're going to do is head on over to Magical Visual Studio Code and start building out a little bit more of our demo component that we started on in the last episode. If you don't have this demo component, you didn't do the first episode, don't worry about it. But if you've never used an IDE before, you have to use an IDE to create a Lightning Web Component. So check out the video that I'm about to link right up above so that you can go set up Visual Studio Code and then come back here and we'll build some Lightning Web Components together. So you don't know what an IDE is, check out that video, then come back here after you've got it all set up. And when you do, If you don't have this demo component built, then you can just hit Control-Shift-P to bring up the magical command palette, and then you'll just create your Lightning Web Component using this command. You'll type in the name of the component, whatever you'd like to name it, and then save it. But I've got this magical demo component that we started in the last episode, so I'm going to work with it. Now, right now, all we have is a paragraph tag, right? And it's nested in this template tag. Now, you know, maybe I want to do something else, like I want to put this in a div for some reason so that I can style it later. And maybe underneath my text, which is this paragraph tag here, so this P represents a paragraph tag or a paragraph element. The div is a divider, so it's a way to kind of divide your page into sections. That's what that tag stands for. Maybe, you know, inside the div, I want to create a header above my paragraph tag, right? Maybe up here, I want to do like an H3 tag, which is a medium-sized header. So it's a paragraph tags are just kind of like regular font text. H3 headers are like section headers for a document or something, bigger, bolder text. So I'll just say, hey, bruh, what up? And then, you know, maybe I want another div for some reason because I'm going to do some styling, which we're not going to do right now. And in that div, I want a button, a button or something, right? And so now I've got this button, and I've got this header tag, and I've got this paragraph tag. And so the question is, you know, how is that going to get loaded into this tree or this parent-child relationship, right? Well, as we'll see in just a minute, once we save this and then we go take a look at the page, the way that this is going, the parent-child relationship that we're going to end up with here is we'll have our template that will be our kind of root, our parent that encapsulates everything. And then we have our div as one parent that has the children H3 and P, the paragraph tag, our header and our paragraph. And then we'll have a second div that has a button underneath it. And both of those divs, and of course everything beneath those divs, will fall under the template as its parent. So the divs, you know, their parent will be the template. So we're going to save this if you haven't already saved it. Again, if you don't have quick save enabled in here, then you can right click here and do sfdx deploy this source to org, and then it'll be in your org. If you didn't follow the last episode, make sure that you update your metadata so that it looks like this one, where you have exposed equal to true in your Lightning Web Component metadata, and you actually, we need to update this. I need to add another target and make this a Lightning app page, like so, because we're going to drop this in a Lightning app page now, which is a little different from a record page. All right, now that this has successfully deployed, let's go back into the Salesforce org and create a Lightning App Builder page. So we'll go to Setup. You don't know how to get there, go to Setup, and then we'll go to Lightning App Builder in the Quick Find menu, and we'll create a new Lightning App Builder page by clicking the New button up there. And then we'll create an app page instead of a record page and hit next. And then we'll just call this, we'll just call it DOM test. How about that? And we'll just create one region to make this as simple as possible. And then you're going to type in the name of your component, whatever you made it, whatever you named it. I named mine demo component, so I'm going to grab that and drop it in the page. And then hit save. And it's going to ask me to activate it, so we're going to activate it. We'll activate it for all users, only if you're in your own dev org. You know, I hope you're not doing this in a production instance. Please don't. As long as you're in a dev org, then just activate it for all users. And then I'm just going to pick an app that I will use. So I'm going to pick the sales app in my org, and I'll add this page to the app so that I can see it. And then hit save. Cool. So saved that, and then I'm going to go back. And then I'm going to navigate to my sales app that I just dropped this bad boy into. And then I will, it's the first tab, of course. So then I'll click DOM test, the tab that I just created for the Lightning App Builder. And then you'll see, you know, it says, hey, what up, bruh? Taco Bell is hot fire, which is exactly what we put together over here, right? As long as we know that the hello world is using binding to pull that over. Anyway, so we've got our hey bruh, what up? Taco Bell's hot fire, and then we have this button that doesn't have any words on it, you know, because we didn't add that yet. So if we inspect this page now, and we use this selector tool here, so what you'll do is you'll click this select element tool over here. You just click that and go over here and click on this hey what up bruh, right? We can see where our component starts here. So this c-demo-component is your, if we pull it back up here, it's your template, right? So your template is going to be represented by the name of your component, in this case, c-demo-component. And then we have our div that has our header tag in it, and then we have our div that has our paragraph tag in it, or, you know, and then underneath there we have our paragraph tag, and then we have our div that has our button in it, right? Just like we talked about. Our template is the parent element that encapsulates all of that stuff. And then if we open up our template, our cdemo component, we will see that we have two divs underneath it. And then we have the H3, the header, and then we have our paragraph under one div, and then under the second div, we have that button that we created. So that seems kind of like an irrelevant piece of information right now. It truly does. Because I remember learning about HTML stuff forever ago, and I'm like, who cares about the stupid DOM tree, right? But the reason that this is important is because when you get to manipulating things in JavaScript, sometimes you need to know how to traverse that tree and what it looks like and how to get a parent and how to get a child, right? And so that's why knowing that tree exists and how it gets built into memory is important. So again, this is not our DOM, but it does show us a representation of the tree or the parent-child relationship between our elements in our page that gets built by the DOM. So we can see again, our parent is our template. Underneath our parent, we have two divs who are the template's children. And then underneath the div, we have its two children, which is the H3 and the paragraph tag. And these two, their parent would be the div. And then underneath this second div, which again is just a child of the template, then we have our button, right? So It's important to know that this exists. It's important to know how it's built. It seems really irrelevant and silly right now. But when you get into to actually writing the JavaScript, it'll be important to know that this stuff does exist and how it all gets built in that hierarchical relationship. Is that the right word? I don't know. Anyway, so we figured out what the DOM is, hopefully, and we've figured out what the DOM tree is and how it gets built based on our HTML and how it gets structured. And now what we need to do is just go over the different types of DOMs. And what I'll tell you is, before we go over these types of DOMs, is if at this point you're confused at all still about the document object model, or you get confused about the different types of DOMs we're going to go over, please don't worry about it. In the next couple episodes, we're going to start building out our HTML, and all of this stuff is going to start to fall in place more and more, and it's going to be a lot more comprehensible. When I first started working with HTML, none of this stuff made sense, but the more and more that I worked with it, the more I understood why my instructor long ago taught me about the DOM before he taught me about anything else. So it might seem confusing right now, but just knowing that this exists is a huge benefit eventually once you start really getting into front-end web development. So stick with me if this is still a little confusing. Anyway, it's off to Shadow DOM land, where we're going to talk about another type of DOM called the Shadow DOM. So, let's get into that. So, the Shadow DOM is a super important thing to understand when you're working with Lightning Web Components, because by default, all of your Lightning Web Components are created in what is referred to as a Shadow DOM. Now, you can change that these days, but historically, in the past, prior to the last year or so, every Lightning Web Component had to render in a Shadow DOM. And that's, it can be tricky to work with in some situations, but in most situations, it rendering in what's referred to as a Shadow DOM is actually super beneficial to you, because what it does is ensure that your Lightning Web Component is encapsulated. Or if I go back up here, if we take a look at the Mozilla documentation, basically what the Shadow DOM is a way for, or what the Shadow DOM provides rather, is a way to encapsulate your custom components. So what that means is when you create your LWC and you load it into the, and it gets loaded into the page by your browser, your Lightning Web Component cannot accidentally interact with other elements in the page, other elements in the DOM, right? If it wasn't part of that Shadow DOM, what it could unintentionally do is start selecting components outside of its scope and interacting with them in ways that you maybe never wanted to have it interact with. So it's very beneficial in most use cases, because the Shadow DOM kind of protects you from yourself in a lot of ways, and make sure that when you create a component, the component is only going to be able to interact with itself and not unintentionally interact with other components in the page that you might build and add as time goes along. And when you work in front-end web development for any length of time, you'll find that unintentionally, especially when you're working with a team of developers, that you will, build some component, place it in a page, and then someone else will build a component and place it in a page, and then all of a sudden, unintentionally, they start to interact with each other because of functionality that got built in and accidentally started selecting elements and in both components. So the shadow DOM protects you from that, and it being implemented in every LWC that you make by default anyway is really, really beneficial because it protects you from yourself and from potentially your team of developers from accidentally having two Lightning Web Components start to conflict with each other. So there's a lot more to be said about the Shadow DOM and how it actually loads into the regular DOM and all the technical aspects behind it. And I'm not going to go over all of those because I think this video has already gotten pretty long. But if you want to take a look more into what the Shadow DOM is and how it works with the regular DOM, I will link this Mozilla documentation in the description of the video, and you can check that out. But the gist of it is, when you create a Lightning Web Component, it's self-contained now. It won't be able to interact with other parts of the DOM that it maybe shouldn't be interacting with. Now, that said, these days, there is a way to create your Lightning Web Components so that they do not work in the Shadow DOM, or they're not rendered using the Shadow DOM, built using the Shadow DOM. I'm using the wrong words now. It's getting late. I'm a little bit tired, truthfully. But there's a way to create your Lightning Web Components now, not using a Shadow DOM. And what you do is essentially declare your Lightning Web Component as being a Light DOM Lightning Web Component. And really, the Light DOM is nothing more than the normal DOM. It's just a new term, more or less, that was brought into the fold, I guess, when the Shadow DOM was introduced a handful of years back. Previously, it was just the DOM, right? But now you've got the Shadow DOM. So how do you distinguish between the Shadow DOM and the regular old DOM? You call it the Light DOM. So when you hear people refer to the Light DOM, it's a term that got introduced when web components, not Lightning Web Components, but regular old, the rest of the web world web components were introduced. And so you will hear the regular DOM being referred to as the Light DOM. So just know that when people refer to the Light DOM, they're talking about the regular old DOM. And so there is a way these days to have your Lightning Web Components load into the regular old DOM by enabling the Light DOM on it. And we will actually get into that in this series much later down the line. But most of the time you're only going to end up doing that for your Lightning Web Components when you need to use some kind of third-party JavaScript library. And even then, it's somewhat rare that you're going to want or need to do that. So, cool. So Shadow DOM, again, is just a nice way to encapsulate your components so they don't interact with other components they're not supposed to. Light DOM is a term introduced when the Shadow DOM was brought into the fold, and the Light DOM just it just means the regular DOM. So nothing really special there. It's the same thing as everything we've been talking about before the Shadow DOM. And then there's the last one called the synthetic Shadow DOM, which you will hear brought up plenty. And I'll just state that there's the synthetic Shadow DOM basically exists for browser backwards compatibility. So for older browsers that don't support all of these more modern concepts like the Shadow DOM, you will see what's referred to as the synthetic Shadow DOM being implemented. I'm doing a lot of air quotes. See, this is what happens when you stay up too late and you make a video and it's like 1:30 in the morning. Anyway, so synthetic shadow DOM, how it works and how that, whole deal operates. It's not super important that you know. You can obviously look into it, but when you hear mention of the synthetic shadow DOM, which you will inevitably hear at some point, just know it's just a way to mimic shadow DOM capabilities in older browsers, in browsers that don't support shadow DOM natively. So cool. So we've gone over all the different major types of DOMs that you're going to run into. Shadow DOM, light DOM, which is just regular DOM, and synthetic shadow DOM, which is basically just a nice way to use polyfills to create a shadow DOM, even though it doesn't really exist for older browsers. And we also know now how the DOM works, what its purpose is, how it loads in, all that kind of stuff. And now that you know this stuff, we can start getting into building out HTML and seeing how this all works together. And then especially when we get into JavaScript, a little bit after we do some HTML basics here coming up, you will see just how important the DOM is when we start using JavaScript to interact with our HTML elements, right? Or really our DOM. So cool. I hope this has given you an okay overview of what the document object model is in your web browsers, because it's super important. I know it's still confusing. Even after this video, it won't be super solid in your mind, probably for just a little bit longer, till we get till we start getting used to building HTML and manipulating it with JavaScript. But it's important that you get this baseline understanding so you know how it all works together. So, with that said, I've been talking a long time now, I feel like. This video is going to be way longer than I thought it was. And I think it's time to take a break. So I will see you soon for some pretty fun HTML stuff. So stick with me. In the next episode, we're going to go over some more HTML basics as they apply to Lightning Web Components, or really just in general. It's not Lightning Web Components specific. So we're getting into the fun stuff real fast, and I will see you, I hope, in the next episode. So see you then.